What I do first off is tell you Happy New Year because it's January. And I know it's late, but Happy New Year. And now I'm going to say the problem with this Happy New Year is that even though we may be all ready to celebrate 2022, we do unfortunately find ourselves in a phase of deja vu. And once again, we find ourselves in a position where we need to be protecting ourselves. Oh, by the way, if you don't know that this is the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, causative agent of COVID-19, where you been? But anyways, by the way, it is Friday. It's late for all of you, so I'm going to be a bit more active to keep you awake. Um, and as a result of that, we've been talking for the last 2 years about protecting ourselves. How are we going to protect ourselves? How are we going to move forward into the future through this idea of protection? And if you actually look at the brochure for the Masterclass for this year, protection was a very, very important component of what we were discussing. However, when you think about the coronavirus and how it spreads, airborne spread and everything like that, the only fashion you might be wanting to think about happens to be this. And believe me, I've actually worn all three. The one that's silver with the big hood and everything, I've literally done dances to Daft Punk in that. So it is not very comfortable, but it's a lot of fun. We're not going to talk about that. In fact, we're going to talk about a different kind of protection, but one that may bring you, well, how do I put it in a way that's going to be very interesting to you, but also have that worldwide appeal, right? And the only thing I can think of based on what happened over the course of 2021 happens to be Squid Game, because it was the absolute #1 show of all the world for 2021. It's just absolutely fascinating. But it's not the Squid Game that I want to take you into. If you want to watch the show, great. If you don't, that's fine. I want to take you into what you saw in the very first slide, 3 different elements. And these are the elements. Now, I've shown you, we've talked about fashion and function and future, but I want to take us into a little bit more in-depth exploration of all 3. And we're going to start with the fashion of self. Now, I'm sure all of you have seen The Vermilion Man and Leonardo da Vinci, and this whole idea of there's so much to the man and there's this big circle that encompasses him. And that's a great idea. But the fact of the matter is, this is only showing 1/2 of who we are as humans. The other half happens to be microbes. And this is one of my specialties. I study microbes and have been since the 1980s, long before many of you were even born. And the fact of the matter is that microbes are everywhere. They make up a part of who we are. And believe it or not, there are times when there are actually more microbes in and on our body than there are actual cells that come from our visible cells. All right. And I'm just going to show this to you here, and that when you actually look at it from this perspective, the complete human has to have both the skin and the cellular component as well as the microbial component involved. And I'm going to take a sip of water here while you take a look at this. Now, what you're seeing here is a very important component of the microbiome, and that is every little part of us has a different collection of microbes. And we can do this. We can literally swab pieces of the body and put it onto a petri plate, and you're going to start to see all sorts of different microbes showing up. And these pie charts give you an idea about the distribution of where these microbes happen to be. But there is one very important thing that you need to know. The majority, we're talking 90 to 99% of them, are completely harmless. They don't do anything. They're just hanging out for the ride, okay? There's a small, very, very small number of them that are helping us. We call them symbiotes or symbiotic. And then there are some that tend to want to harm us, pathogens, pathobiontic if you want, and those we want to try and avoid. But for the purposes of our discussion, we're going to talk about the ones that we don't like, not necessarily because they intend on causing us harm, but because they make us smell. And this is an important part of human living that I think all of you need to understand. When we secrete stuff like sweat, like sebum, and many other things, if it's clear, it doesn't smell. Instead, what ends up happening is that the bacteria that are on us use that as food. And as they make these byproducts from the food, it creates a smell. And I've got a list here of different types of bacteria that cause different types of smells. So all of a sudden, if you decide that, I seem to be smelling a little bit, I don't know, acid spicy, well, then there's a good chance you have actinobacteria on you. And I'm just going to share with you for a few seconds. There's this one study where they actually looked at the use of deodorant to find out what exactly happened. And it was funny because deodorant actually took away the smell for the first, 24 hours, but then it came back and it was actually stronger because you had a higher microbial concentration. That's why you need to shower more. And people who used antiperspirants, well, they were actually able to stop the microbes from growing and therefore stop the smell for a longer period of time. But they also changed the nature of the bacteria under the arms, and some people ended up actually smelling like grass. And it was really rather funny because in some cases, if people have been using antiperspirants, they will smell different than what you would normally expect them to smell. And it's actually a sort of a catch or a tell that someone has been using antiperspirants. And hopefully by the end of this particular talk, you may realize, maybe we don't need the antiperspirants after all. But that's for you to decide over the weekend. What I want to tell you is that when we have all of these different collections of smells together, we end up having essentially what we have with wine. So that, when you put your nose into that glass, you're going to come up with a collection of different types of smells, and it's going to give character to that individual glass of wine. And that character is going to translate not only into the smell, but even afterwards when you taste it. However, when we talk about humans, if you were to all of a sudden stick your nose into the most aromatic part of the body, that being the underarms, well, you probably would have a different response. Now, the thing that you have to realize is when we have smells growing inside of us, or on us, I should say, that can actually get into our clothes. And what I have on the left here is from a paper that actually shows you how odors grow within the clothes. And on the right, what I have are some of the most detectable odors. And if you see at the bottom, it says almost, often, sometimes, rarely, never. Well, what you find is that in many cases, that sort of musky odor, the food odor, and even the body odor is rarely, taken into effect when you're smelling people. And that's one of the reasons why we have all of these products that we're using. However, when you start getting into that sort of that body odor, and even that sort of musty sort of that almost grassy odor, people tend to pick up on that. And that's one of the reasons why people will avoid. And it's really fascinating. There are some researchers who actually look at the development of scent in the clothes and how it relates to how we have social connections. And I have a friend, and she actually is a professor down in Florida, and she conducts these smell dates. So you've probably heard of speed dating, where you sit down with someone, talk with them for like 30 seconds, and then you move to the next person. Well, in this particular case, you smell them for like 30 seconds. And then if you have a smell that you actually sort of enjoy, then you get to meet the person. Really fascinating stuff. Hasn't taken off yet. Don't expect an app. And if we ever do get an app where the 4D smell comes out, I'm sure you've probably heard of that. That's going to be fabulous. Later, not going to have anything to do with what you're doing today. Now, in terms of the frequency of noticing odor, well, it does vary, but it's really interesting that the t-shirt and the socks are the ones that we would expect to be able to smell all the time, and yet for the majority of cases, they really aren't all that picked up. And that's really interesting because when you think about it from the perspective of how am I going to design my clothing, sometimes we have these preconceived ideas in our head as to what's going to happen, and therefore design the clothing such that we want to try and come up with, well, a person's going to wear their socks only once, then they're going to wash their socks, and then they're going to probably throw away their socks. So really, how much design should I be putting into a sock, right? Uh, I mean, it's still very important. And to be honest with you, it's been minus 30, minus 40 here in Edmonton, and I've been needing really good socks, and sometimes they're very hard to find. Now, we tend to rewear our clothes, and this particular information here on the left shows you how, even if you've been doing some washing, there's still going to be some lingering odors, bacteria, that type of thing. And so it will just accumulate. And on the right, you're going to see that many people, depending on the type of clothing that they have, are going to be washing them after only one wear. And that's very important for us to understand, because if you are washing after only one wear, then what ends up happening is that in the environmental sustainability angle, well, you are contributing to the problem. Because while we do concentrate on, the manufacturing and the production as being major causes of global warming, carbon dioxide, GHGs, whatever you want to call it, we too contribute by actually increasing our washing use as a result of smells. So that's one component of who we are. And it shows you, in a way, how the microbes, being a part of us, can actually contribute to a detrimental effect to the environment and sustainability. But I want to turn to that pathogen component for a second, because the other thing we need to be worried about when it comes to clothing, and this has been documented in research, and I'm going to get into that, are these little balls here. And it was funny. I was actually going to take that circle and transform it into one of these balls. And I'm like, nah, better not do that, because these balls are better known as Staphylococcus aureus. And while they may normally be a bacterium that appears on all of our skins, they also tend to be pathogenic, and they can cause a variety of different type of infections. In fact, they cause the majority of infections in humans. And what you see here is in orange, those are upper respiratory tract infections, including COVID-19. And below that, we have pneumonia, which is essentially flu and bacteria. So we commonly think as upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract infections as being the worst. But believe it or not, skin infections from Staph aureus are. And why is that important? Well, I'm going to skip over this because this is just showing you that it's skin infections that come from being on your skin. And that usually comes from things like rewearing clothes. And I want to show you this instead, where we actually look at the amount of survival that occurs with Staph aureus, which I've actually sort of highlighted here, over time. Now, if we look at clean clothing, all right, well, it doesn't survive very long. So if it's a brand new piece of cloth and you contaminate it, then eventually the bacteria is going to die off and you're not going to have too much to worry about. However, if it is soiled, all right, if it has been reworn, if it wasn't washed properly, then what ends up happening here is that, and I'm going to take you through this. We take a little 25 centimeter square cloth, okay? We're going to put some bacteria on it as if we had laundered it, but it didn't actually get rid of all the bacteria. Then we're going to actually let it sit for a certain amount of time. Then we're going to touch it with our skin, our fingertip. This is something I used to do in the laboratory. And then when you've touched it, what we do is we look at how many bacteria have actually shown up on your finger. If you see that T, that means that there are too numerous to count. It's over 1,000. And this is how we end up with high levels of bacteria in our clothing that could possibly lead to a skin infection. And that's incredibly important for us to understand, because going completely away from design for a second, the human is the most important factor in the spread of disease. It's not food. It's not surfaces. It's not even animals. It's us and how we live our lifestyle. And clothing is a big factor in that. So that takes care of the circle. It is us. It is our fashion of who we are as humans. Now we're going to move on to the square. And the square, as you saw above, is function. Now, how are we going to utilize function in our clothing to be able to deal with what we have just seen in the circle? And the answer is something that has been around for well over 6,000 years as a means of being able to control those bacteria, including Staphylococcus aureus, and that happens to be silver. Now, I know a lot of people think silver is jewelry. However, we have also known for, as I said, 6,000 years, that silver has the ability to control microbial organisms. In fact, it used to be dusted so that it could be put on wounds in order for them to heal. And this was back in the, in the very, very early days. Today, you can actually buy bandages in the pharmacy or drugstore, apothecary, that's what we like to call them, that actually have silver impregnated into them. So we know that it is absolutely essential for something like silver to be able to help us fight off bacteria. It's just that for the longest time, we've done it from a medical perspective. But in the last 20 to 25 years, we've looked at it for being able to help us in the context of fashion and clothing. However, instead of a square, I want you to think of a plus, a positive sign. As I said at the very top, I want you to think of this as silver, but also as polygene. Now, we're going to get into silver's positive function. This is what silver looks like at the microbial level or at the microscopic level when we're actually utilizing it in a fabric. And it's really cool. I mean, it has all of this amazing surface area. It just kind of flows around. And for anyone who is interested in the chemistry, what ends up happening is that we have the silver and it's actually contained within titanium dioxide. And so as a result, you get this really cool formation of these wonderful particles. And we're going to get into how that goes into the clothing in a little bit, but I want you just to see what this does initially. And when it gets into the clothing, what ends up happening is that all of this components that I talked about in the circle, such as the bacteria growing, the odor developing, actually gets minimized by the silver. And the way that works isn't necessarily something that is easy to understand, but rather than try to confuse you on a Friday afternoon, I'm going to make it really simple for you. So we're going to start by showing you the various different ways that silver can essentially stop a bacterium from growing. There's no quiz. You don't have to memorize this. It's going to get easier. However, we're going to start with number one, the disrupt the cell wall. And I'm going to take you into that orange and green section and zoom in so that you can actually see what it actually looks like at the molecular level. And it really does look like circles with these long attachments onto them. And essentially what you're looking at is a combination of a polar head and a lipid tail, which I know probably doesn't mean a heck of a lot, but when you're thinking about design, polar head, lipid tail might be able to help you in your mood boards. And when you start looking at that, maybe once you're doing your Google, you'll actually see some really interesting things. Now, what ends up happening is that these membranes carry a charge. So just like a magnet, right? You have a positive side and a negative side. Well, these membranes have a magnetic charge of negative. Silver has a magnetic charge of positive. That's why I'm using the positive. I told you I was going to get there. And as a result of that, what happens is when the positive comes in, and all of you have done this with a magnet, it attracts. And what ends up happening is that it starts pulling away at all that negativity. And it creates these positive pores where all of a sudden everything that's inside the bacterium or virus starts to leak out. Now just imagine you have a balloon and you start leaking out air. What ends up happening? It goes down, it crumples, it eventually turns into this very small thing that just is no longer functional. That's exactly what silver does to the membrane, so that when it leaks out, it becomes that balloon. Now, inside of the cell, we have DNA. In fact, all of us have DNA inside of our cells, right? But at a microbial level, once you've created pores like that, then the silver can actually get inside of the bacterium. And when it does, it can seek out the DNA. And what I've done here is I've shown you the different components that come in RNA, the ribonucleic acid, and the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid. And again, you can see a shape here, right? And that shape is really important because if you break that shape up, you're not going to be able to have DNA that's effective, that's functional, okay? And what ends up happening is when the silver comes in, the positive breaks up these individual pieces and takes them away from the DNA, thereby destroying that wonderful double helix structure. And that's how silver can actually stop a cell from growing at the DNA level. All right. And we have some very interesting data to show this. So, what we have here is bacterial survival after being exposed to silver. And as you can see, over a very short period of time, having that wonderful positive silver component, ingredient, whatever you want to call it, that white, beautiful thing that you just saw, will actually bring down bacterial survival in just a matter of moments. That's very, very important because when you're designing a fabric, what you want to do is you want to have a balance of function so that you're not putting in so much of the positive that it's just going to wipe everything out. But more importantly, you're going to do it so that it actually has the ability to be sustainable. And now I'm just going to show you some little data here. I try not to use words in my slides, but sometimes I kind of have to, and this is one of them. So in order for you to see that graph, you need 1 part per quadrillion of that positive. All right? How much do you use in the fabrics? Well, Polygene uses less than 1 part per trillion. And you think to yourself, okay, I get it. You know, that's going to be incredibly effective. That's wonderful. I mean, we're using almost 1,000 times more. Wonderful. But how much do you need to have in the environment for it to be safe? And that's 1 part per billion, which is 1,000 times even higher than that. And so this is where you start to see how if you're working with a company that actually has the ability to use a product and knows how the product works well, you can then find that beautiful harmonized balance and then use that in order for us to be able to create something that is functional, but also has the ability to be sustainable. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. There is one more thing that I want you to know, and that is if you've ever smelled anything that makes you go, oh my goodness, what was that? All right. It usually has this this yellow thing here called a thiol. All right. Now, this molecule here is one of the stinkiest molecules alive. And the fact of the matter is that when you smell it, even at the part per trillion level, you are not going to be very happy. And it happens to be one of the few byproducts of bacteria on the skin. So you can end up smelling pretty bad. However, once again, the positive comes in. And what it does is it actually attaches to that thiol and then rips it off. So now we've gone from a yellow that makes you very unhappy to thankfully emojis are also yellow and now you're happy. All right, I know that was cheesy. I'm sorry. But that's a really great way for us to be able to move on from the positive and from the circle, thus the use of the emoji, to the triangle. And with respect to the triangle, we want to be able to sustain a future. Now, I don't know about you, but I've learned over the last 50 years of my life, almost 51. I'm a Valentine's Day baby, so, you know, it's going to be very soon. Over those 51 years, what I've learned is that the larger that an industry gets, the more wasteful it becomes. And when we talk about the fashion industry, all right, and I mean, Squid Game is perfect in terms of the fashion industry. I mean, yes, yesteryear it was Heidi Klum with her one day you're in, the other day you're out. And, God bless her. And, she's just a beautiful German role model for fashion. She's done so much for it. But when you think about it, the Squid Game is also very important for us to think about because at the end of the day, we're all trying to race to do something important, but only a few of us are ever truly going to succeed. And when we talk about the fashion industry, we're so focused on trying to get that success that we forget that in a $3 trillion business, we end up contributing a lot to the waste that occurs in the environment. And here we have a little bit of data. From 2000 to 2014, clothing production doubled. 20% of the wastewater is produced by the fashion industry. That's more than mining. That's more than oil and gas. It's incredible how much water is used. And the worst part about it, we've learned from 2000 to 2014 that clothes are designed to be thrown away, and they really are designed to be only kept half as long as they used to be. Look at this, 208 million pounds of waste is generated by single-use outfits. 1 in 2 people dispose of unwanted clothing straight into the trash. And 64% of the 32 billion garments produced each year end up in the landfill. And you can see in behind, excuse me, that is a landfill full of clothes. And at the end of the day, we really are generating a future of waste because of the COVID pandemic. And this slide here is only about masks. 200 million pounds of waste just due to masks across the world since the start of the pandemic. Single use is the heart of all the problems that we have. And we need to figure out how we can use something that's functional in order to give us the opportunity to reuse, rewear, and not have to deal with the issues that I showed you at the beginning in the circle, whereby you end up having accumulation and increased risk. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to think about because your jobs right now are to design things such as the perfect shirt for the germ guy so that I can show all my symbology in my one shirt. I don't think you really care about whether or not it's going to lead to 20, 50, or 100 wears, or whether or not those extra wears are going to lead to someone possibly ending up in an emergency room with impetigo, cellulitis, or some other type of skin infection. But that's where we are today. And because of COVID-19, this has been heightened to the point that is absolutely something you need to be thinking about. And so, instead of sharing a future with a triangle, I suggest we share a future with sustainability. And I want you to just think about that and read this while I take a sip of water. Now, I promised you I was going to show you how we can incorporate that positive into our clothing. And as you can see here, it's probably one of the easiest ways possible. There's no extra work that's needed, no extra human power that's needed. In fact, all you really need is a bath pad. And then once you've completed that, you're going to put it through the exact same process that you do. It's not entirely 100% passive, but is as passive as you're going to be able to get at this point. And what we've learned is that after this happens, you've created a situation where you have protection. Now, here is a test that was done by the Polygene people. And what you'll find is that The first line is initial, and the second line is after 15 times of washing. And here's the species, Staphylococcus aureus, as I've been talking about. All right. Here's the reduction just by being in the cloth, 99.95%. Now I'm going to take you through a small little journey into my world of microbiology just to give you perspective as to what this means. Okay. It takes about 1,000 to 10,000 microbes to cause an infection, particularly on the skin. Okay. If we start off with 1.3 times 10 to the 4, that is 13,000. Okay. That's enough to cause an infection. Over the course of time, that number could potentially grow, and you end up transferring that to your skin, and you could possibly end up with an infection. That's how it works. Every time we drop it down, so from 13,000 to 1,300, 1,300, we call that a magnitude, a log, or a 90% reduction. So you go down to 1,300, that's 90% reduction. You go down to 130, that's a 99% reduction. You go down to 13, that's a 99.9% reduction. If you go down to 1.3, and of course we don't do that, we call it 1, then it's a 99.95% reduction. But the most important thing for you is that it's no longer 13,000 on this on the clothing, which is potentially going to cause an infection. It's 1, and it's harmless. Let's look at something else. And I don't know if there are anybody, and if anyone's a parent out there or has younger brothers and sisters, but carpet is a huge problem because it can accumulate all of these microbes over time. And one thing that you have to understand is that microbes are accumulating in our environment all the time. That's why we tend to clean. And from a carpet perspective, the last thing you want is to have anything in there that is going to be essentially at the level that could possibly lead to an infection. Once again, we see that after 120 minutes, only 2 hours of actual contact, you've reduced it 99.99%. Or what we would essentially say is that it went from 100,000 to 1. That's the power of having silver that we've known for well over 6,000 years, but now repurposing for a different function so that we can have that sustainability. Now, what does that mean for you as designers? Because I've given you a lot of really good infection prevention control data here, but at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to save washes. So if you save 1 wash out of every 10, okay, worldwide, you are saving 47 million tons of CO2, 4.5 billion cubic meters of fresh water. Yeah, that's a lot. But imagine if you could cut that washing in half. I mean, the numbers are staggering, but it's also going to be able to help in a way that you can not only help to sort of offset what happens at the front end of the manufacturing process, because that's very difficult. But more importantly, you're able to maintain, sustain. The only thing that as a designer you have to realize is that you have to get out of the mentality of the once a season and instead start thinking about longer. And Isaac Mizrahi was perfect at this, right? Like he could literally come up with one particular model that could last for several. Michael Kors could do the same thing. So the fact is that we do have designers who have shown us how to be able to go over season and maintain. And so I think that's something that we want to sort of think about. And as I said, if you were able to give me a Germ Guy shirt that had all the symbology, then I would be wearing that for, probably until I threw it out because it has every component that I need. And then all you need to really do is think about how you can create that design so that it provides people with what they are looking for. And that's where your creativity comes into it. Here's another little piece of information that's probably going to be of interest to you. If you keep your clothes 9 months longer than you normally would, and remember, I mean, people are throwing them out within the same year, these are the savings that you get. And while the waste savings may not be as dramatic, at the end of the day, and as you can see in the back, this is essentially what it looks like in a landfill. If you can somehow try and reduce that, that is just absolutely amazing. So we started off with fashion, function, and future. We've moved to self, silver, and sustain. Now I want you to think of one more trio, and that is the planet, our lives, and the business. What that means is we are part of this planet, including our microbiomes, including ourselves. We need function through silver to allow us to live life that is safe and protected. And by using something like silver, we can help to maintain a business that is less wasteful and, more importantly, that provides for individuals. And honestly, as I said at the very, very beginning of this talk, if you can combine all three symbols into a shirt, I'm surely going to wear it. But if you do it in this particular case, well, then everybody's going to win. And now, if you want to learn more stories about microbes and our lives with them, you can read one of my 2 best-selling books. I have to do it. I have to plug it. I'm sorry. And then from that point on, well, basically, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
So wonderful. Thanks a lot. That was really, energetic refreshment, I would say, and a wonderful insight. I just open the floor for every one of you who wants to ask something. Take the chance to ask Jason and dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and for the record, the reason I have this microphone is I do call-in shows on the radio about COVID-19. So don't be afraid to ask me questions, because the questions I get from people who are angry at me on the radio will be nothing. Like, your questions will be nothing compared to that.
Can imagine, especially in case of COVID-19 and vaccination
don't even
mandate.
get me started. Yeah. If you don't ask me questions, I'm going to start telling you questions people have asked me on the telephone. So you better ask me questions.
So, who wants to start? Jess?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. My question is about the silver. I have heard a lot about their advantageous properties, but I've also read quite a lot of articles about how the toxicity, is that how you say it, to aquatic organisms like in the water, like rainbow trout and other fish that I've read about. And obviously every time we wash our clothes, we lose microfibers, and apparently these silver nanoparticles can come out in the wash as well with it. So I just wanted to ask how we use these silver properties without damaging ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a bit of a fashion component to that. You're asking the bell bottoms question. They were back in the 1970s, and we don't really use them today. And if you are using bell bottoms, oh, please don't do that. I hate them. I'm from the 70s. I hated them. But let me explain something to you. Back in the 1990s, actually, it was when silver started going into clothing. They used a component called silver nitrate. And in those days, what was happening is that it was actually getting incorporated into the fabric by essentially just putting it there. And it didn't have any of those surface area clutches or anything like that. So as soon as you washed it and you lost a fiber, right, then you would lose a significant portion of the silver nitrate. And that's really where we started getting into this idea of silver getting into the environment that could potentially lead to problems for the fish and other wildlife. I'll get into that in a second. The reason that we use these particles now is because when they're impregnated within the fabric, especially once they've actually been flattened out through the rollers, they tend to be resistant to washing. And when you are doing the wash just in a regular load, okay, you're probably losing maybe about 1 part per billion, maybe 3 parts per billion per wash. But then what's going to happen is that's going to go into essentially the watershed, and that's going to end up at the wastewater, and then it's eventually going to end up in taken out of the water. So if you look at the effluent, what comes out of the wastewater of plants, it's going to be devoid or zero silver as a result of these particular types of clothes or this ingredient. There are others that in the past have sort of leached out, that's the word that we tend to use. But one of the things that I requested when I was talking with the company was, you got to tell me what your profile is, and it's right there in the documentation. So in that sense, it's okay. Now, why is the 1 part per billion per wash important? Because what we've determined is that in the environment, and believe it or not, I mean, this could be a fish, it could be algae, it could be a number of things. You need to have an accumulation that starts at around 10 billion. So the fact of the matter is that the clothing in the wash that you're doing is going to have no impact on the environment down the stream. And this is a very, very important factor, especially in Europe, because there are now regulations that are coming out from the European Union that essentially state that if you don't have an ability to address this, then you may not be able to have certain claims on your fabric. So it's a very, very important question, and it is one that I take seriously, because for me, I look at some of the other potential antimicrobials out there, and first thing I do is not look at their ability. I look at their GHGs. I look at their, what are they doing in the environment? And 6,000 years ago they were using silver. Today we can still use silver. We just have to do it properly. We have to do it smartly, I guess is the best approach to say. And yeah, the Polygene people, that's why I trust them so much, because that's exactly what they do. But thank you so much, Jess, because we need to have that discussion.
Yeah, I think because I also noted if no one of the participants will ask this about this controversial discussions about silver, I would have asked, because I think it's really. This is also the role of Masterclass, or that is what I want to stand for, what we do here, that we show and that we exchange what is possible, and to weigh in what is better, or what in several terms we can define, because it's not in general to say, oh, this is BS and nobody never use it, but it will always be, when we talk about sustainability, about special things, some special things we can bring to the production of our fabrics and clothing industry. Sometimes we have to weigh in and check what is the best solution.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't really matter what world you live in. There's always going to be evolution. And so I worked with the first antimicrobial silver socks back in 1998 in the lab. And that's why I was put on to the leaching, because I could actually see the silver leaching out into the fabric. And I'm like, guys, what's this? And they're like, oh, don't worry. They only wear a sock like 5 or 6 times and they throw it out anyway. Like, seriously, that was my expression. I had longer hair at the time, so it looked really cool and demonic. But anyway, so the thing is that over time, what happens is we learn what the detriments or the lack of quality comes in, and then we try and find ways to be able to improve that quality. And we see this in the fashion industry all the time. I mean, think about it. If you wear 1970s polyester, and please don't, because it's really, really, really bad, you will find that you can only wear it once before it stinks to high heaven. Like, you go to the discotheque, you have a great time, you do some John Travolta moves, you go home, you can't get the stink out of that polyester, no matter how hard you try. But we now have the ability to use different types of enzymes in our wash. Or in this particular case, you can actually use something like a silver component to actually reduce the level of bacteria, reduce the level of risk, and reduce the level of smell. So that's essentially how we evolve over time.
Any more questions? Come on, super interesting topic, and especially for those who are going to the sports sector or like to go enter this. And as I said, we need also to bring in more functionality in everyday clothing because people want to feel protected and safe. So, any question? Yes, Susanna?
Yeah, I was just wondering, how much is this silver already used in garments and clothing? Do you know?
So, yeah, so right now, there are a few different silver companies out there. They all use a different process. And so, what you will find is if you were looking at silver as being a possible ingredient brand to put into your clothing, you would identify sort of what the actual product happens to be based on the company or the brand. And what you then want to do is then you want to ask the question, just like Jess did, what is, how much of it is lost through a wash? Also, you want to ask them for data that actually shows that their silver does indeed actually kill. Okay, I used to work in the lab, and we would do a lot of different types of, killing, and we would use antibiotics in that. And we actually did some silver killing to find out what the concentrations were. Well, one day, someone had actually left a petri dish and it had a little bit of silver in it. And when we came back in, we figured that there was nothing going to be growing. Well, it turns out that there was a bug that was growing there, and it ended up actually evolving over the course of the week to depend on silver. It was actually using silver to survive. So you've heard about antibiotic resistance, right? Well, silver resistance is something that can occur. And so, one of the beautiful things about this idea is if you don't ask them questions such as, how much are you removing? How much is staying around? Then you could find yourself in a position where maybe you could be allowing for resistance to occur. I highly doubt it with the amount of silver that's being used today, but these are the types of questions that you can ask. And so, it's not necessarily about how many people are using silver, it's about how are they using silver. And check out on that and then find the one that feels most comfortable for you.
Mm-hmm. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Tanya?
Hello, thank you very much. I had this idea before we had to do the workshop to use like shredded masks for puffy parts, for example, for a puffer jacket or something like that, but used masks. And I found a solution to send them through a ultraviolet light tunnel
Yes.
or something like that. So I was wondering if this method is like possible for more, not only for the coronavirus type of bacteria. Is it possible to do it for like also for different garments and different bacteria?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely fantastic question. So, what you want to understand is that ultraviolet light, we call it UVC, will kill. And when you have a specialized tunnel, like you've seen for the masks, right? What's happening is that the ultraviolet light is at a certain strength and it will get in there and it will actually kill whatever happens to be in there. And that's great. Now, you can do that, but the problem is that there's this rule that happens with ultraviolet light, and that is for every sort of centimeter that you're further away from the fabric, you're losing double the amount of strength. Okay. So you would have to have the fabric literally like a suntan bed in order for it to work. Then you would have to keep it there probably for about 3 hours, depending on the amount of bacteria that would be in there. And that's going to use up a lot of energy, right? That's the first thing. But the other thing is, it's still going to smell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the major problem that we have with many of the sort of passive washing, is that if you're not using water, enzymes, and detergent, yes, you're going to kill the bug, but you're not going to get rid of the smell. And then it's just going to accumulate and accumulate. And I'll be honest with you, Having talked to my friend in Florida, I asked her, what is more threatening when it comes to a relationship with an individual? Is it the bacteria that's there, or is it the smell? It's always going to be the smell. So for a medical perspective, ultraviolet light is definitely something to explore. We call it UVC 254. You can read up on that, Google it, even send me an email if you want to learn more about that. It's really fascinating. But in terms of sort of for a fashion and function modality, it's not really going to help. I'm sorry.
Thanks. Any other? Eugenia? Yeah, our first-hand source for the size of the landfills in our faraway countries, or not so far away.
Exactly. I was going to ask a question related to that. So, Jason, imagine I want to start a small business and I'm thinking sustainability. So first, I want to collect some used clothes from my community to remake something new to donate to people that are less privileged to buy clothes. Now, if I collect this old garments from people, it might have a bacteria and some might smell.
Yes.
How do I treat this clothes to make them good that I won't be transferring this bacteria to the people that I made the clothes for? I ask this question also because I have an old cloth, which I think that I have worn for a long time, but the armpit has a lot of sweat in it.
Yeah.
I have washed it severally, but because it's old, still I can perceive that sweat in the armpit area.
Yes.
So it means
Exactly.
that it might have a bacteria and it might have this odor thing I need to get rid I need to get rid of. How do I go about this?
Well, okay. So what country are you in? I missed that. I'm sorry, Eugenia.
I'm from Ghana.
Ghana. Oh my goodness, Ghana. I love that. So what you want to do is when you have the old clothing, all right, there are a few components that you can use to be able to get rid of the smell, all right? One happens to be direct use of a hydrogen peroxide. I don't know if you know that or not, but hydrogen peroxide is very good at removing smell. I figure in Ghana, you probably will have access to that. If you didn't, right, salt and lemon juice would do the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. So the reason you're doing that is you're trying to rip off that thiol group that I showed you. Because if there's other stuff there, it doesn't smell, no one's going to care. But if you're trying to get that thiol group off, then yes, the lemon juice with like a salty lemon juice is probably going to help a lot. Or if you have the hydrogen peroxide, it's just going to rip that thiol off, which is great. Now, in terms of using the older clothes, should you be concerned with the bacteria that's there? I mean, sure, but the beautiful thing is if you sort of hand wash them in a very high concentration of detergent and you have that enzyme in there, I don't know if you have the Resolve enzyme, but if you go to your local grocery store, into the washing machine or to the laundry, some will have an enzyme. That will also help. But again, this is something where you could probably just do the same thing in a high, and by washing them in that salty lemon solution to be able to just sort of get as much out of there as possible. And lemon juice does have some killing properties. It's just not as good as, say, a hydrogen peroxide. And of course, if you don't mind fading, then bleach is your best option. It's just that a lot of people in the fashion industry, as soon as I say bleach, they unfriend me. So I don't want to recommend that.
Thank you very much.
Now, just to explain my announcement for Eugenia, or my introduction to Eugenia, she is really showing us firsthand with her own pictures of the landfills in her home country. And yes. For most of the students, it was really interesting to listen to her and see these pictures and the impressions connected to this. To have not only the pictures you see in the media, but to have really someone here who knows it, yeah, by seeing it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have yet to be on the continent myself. I totally want to go. I have, I have friends on the East Coast and I have a few friends on the West Coast, but I just haven't gotten there yet. But having been in South America, I've seen very similar things. And I agree that sometimes, how many of you know about the circle of life when it comes to a product? So you have the cradle, and then you essentially go through the like the design process, then the manufacturing process, then you sell it, and then it becomes waste, right? We call it cradle to grave. But there's a section there that everyone misses, and that is to bring it back to raw. And what Eugenia is trying to do, and one thing that I've been trying to promote for many, many years, is to fill in that by either finding a way to bring all that waste down to basic first principles, elements, components, whatever that you can then use. And I was using bacteria to be able to break down plastics and stuff like that. Or you take that material and repurpose it or re-engage it. So you clean it off, you do what's necessary to be able to make it brand new, and then you redevelop it so that it turns into something better, right? And that's the circular economy, as a lot of people have talked about. Most people don't even know what that is. But Eugenia is really showing us what that means. And so when you think about putting your design together, don't think about the first half of the circle. Think about the back half of the circle and how we're going to get back to raw based on what your design states. By the way, I learned something at Slush about how to do that, which was unbelievable, because they were using a concept not of rewards or kickbacks, if you will, but if you could actually show that you could put together the whole circle so that you start at raw again, you actually have a better chance of getting contracts. You get sort of like a positive on your request for proposal. So this is definitely a place where we're going to be going, and I really recommend that you think about that. So thanks, Eugenia. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just to underline, that was exactly the task that all of them were working on, that we imagine that the stuff which is already here, because Christopher Rayburn, in his speech 4 years ago or so, in one of the years of Masterclass, he entered the scene and said, you don't have to bring in new stuff. There's enough textile stuff on the world, so work with
Exactly.
that. And they have really shown up already with the ideas they brought with them, with all the participants, and now they are working on concepts really to repurpose and to work on this to rework. And my interest is always to make clear this is also material. Okay, it's not the virgin material which comes from the roll, but it's material, and then you can repurpose it.
So if we can, because I know it's 5 o'clock and it's almost time to go, but can we just go through everybody once, because we just have a small amount of people here, and just tell me what shape actually spoke to you most?
Yeah, of
We do
course.
that? All right.
Yeah.
Let's start off with my favorite place, Lapland, with Anina. By the way, what temperature is it out there? I just want to find out.
I think it's like -10 at the moment.
Well, that's not
least.
bad. We had
Yeah.
-30 to -40, so you guys were laughing at us.
It's getting over here.
All right. So what shape?
I think there was something in all of them,
Of course, she starts off with the most diplomatic answer. All of them. Come on, make a choice.
I think the last one, this triangle
cycle.
shape and the future, because we need to think about that.
Cool. All right, Antonia, I guess we're going to go in alphabetical order here.
I'm Antonia. I'm from Germany. My favorite sign, I think, it's the sustainable sign.
The sustainability.
Yeah, because we also use this in our presentation.
Oh, fantastic! Yay! Great minds think alike. All right, Callista.
I also like the triangle, the recycle one.
Fantastic. I think we might have a winner here. Connie, give us something different. No, just joking.
Yeah, I would like, but I also like the triangle.
All right. Denise.
Open your
Denise.
micro.
Sorry.
There we go.
I also like the triangle because I think circularity is very important for the future.
Thank you. All right, Emilia.
I wanted to say that too. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, we'll start with Emilia P. I didn't realize there were two. I'm sorry, Emilia P. So Amelia M. What would you like?
Yeah, I was gonna say the triangle too. I like
Yeah.
the facts that you put in there.
Oh, awesome. Amelia P.
Should I say it again?
Mhm.
Okay, I like the triangle too. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just-
No, please do not be sorry. Like it's who here watches Eurovision? Did you not see what happened with Maneskin? Like they were behind Mr. Switzerland for like the longest time, and then the public showed up, and oh my God, right? So if you guys all really want the triangle, then that's the Maneskin for this particular talk, and I'm okay with that. Eugenia, I'm imagining you're going to be the triangle, right?
No, I'm sorry because I want to have a daughter. I want to have a daughter in future, and I want her to have a place on this earth. So I'm sorry, I'll choose sustainability too.
That's that's the best reason. Evita.
I also liked the triangle part, but the circle one was also very interesting. And I was very hooked in that part. I think, yeah, you really had a very, very well presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that so much. Okay, please, I hope I get this correct. Is it Howie?
It is. You're right.
Thank you.
I don't know. I think I might go with the circle, with the sustainability and everything, but at the end of the day, it's the future. Like we're the future, you know? So if it's not now, there is no future. So maybe the triangle, like I'm in between.
The circle.
The circle, okay.
Yes, another circle. Yay. For the record, people, the circle is my research for 30 years. So so if you go with the circle, you know you're going to have my love. But no, but seriously, the triangle is also something I've been very focused on. It's only been for 15 years. All right, Jess.
Yeah, I mean they're all intertwined, aren't they? They're all working intersectionally with each other, so I suppose you've got to pick them all, but the facts that I found the most interesting were the ones about the triangle, just because I've seen no published data on about the disposability of the one-use things with coronavirus. So I did find that really interesting. Especially my mum's a nurse, so I've seen how much stuff they go through every day. Yeah, it'd be good to try and make that industry more sustainable as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Leah. Or is it Lee?
Yeah, I think the triangle one and the recycling sign was very interesting because I think recycling is really important and we have to think about our future.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lena.
Yeah, I have to also say the triangle. Yeah.
Cool. Rania?
Yeah, like the others. But I thought everything was very interesting. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Susanna.
I would actually say the square because that was like I hadn't known about the silver before, so that I always love to learn something new. So that was my favorite part.
Thank you. All right, Tanya.
Yeah, I think I like the triangle and the circle both equally the same.
So you're going to be a diplomat when you grow up. Okay, cool. No, seriously, thank you so much. And I'm really glad that all of you are, providing this really interesting perspective because for me, right, science is part of what I do, but I also communicate science. And it's so fascinating to be able to hear your perspectives because what it does is it helps me to develop how I share science in the future. So I really appreciate this. And that leads us to our last, but definitely not least, Yvette.
I'm gonna go with the triangle too, but I gotta say, I liked your logo really much, the one with the reds, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
or that you thought you could put as your profile picture. It's really cool.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, the fact of the matter is that I too love design, and I mean, I used to design myself when I was younger. I would do different hairstyles, I would do different looks, different body weights. Then you hit 50 and you realize you can't do that much anymore. So I get people to draw me. But anyways, so before I guess I'm take my leave, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And more importantly, thank you for helping me to appreciate where I need to be going in the future because we are all in this together as collaborators, whether we think about it or not. And so when I walk from here and I go and I talk to my friends over at Polygene, we have something to go with. We have a tone that we can work with. And that just means so much to me. So I have gained just as much as you have out of this.
So thanks a lot also for this lovely closing tour of the table. I really love that. I would go for a circle because I love the cycle of life. And but it was a wonderful opportunity to listen to you and all the content. Really appreciate that you took the time and despite the time zone differences, thanks really also for this effort. I know it's tough, but yeah, I think we are all very inspired also for something to think about over the weekend until we meet again on Tuesday. So yeah, thanks, Jason. And once again, thanks to Nick for making this possible too. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And Nora, if any of them want my email address, just please give it to them. I'm
Okay.
more than happy to talk with any of you. All right?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Teresa. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.